It's the moment no one saw coming but everyone is talking about now. Justin Baldoni has just flipped the entire narrative on its head, exposing a bombshell legal backfire that's left Blake Lively's team scrambling for damage control. What was supposed to be a powerful offensive move by Lively has now detonated in her own lap, leaving scorched reputations, media fallout, and a courtroom trail of chaos in its wake. If this case was ever about truth, justice, or protecting one's image, then Lively may have just lost the very control she fought so hard to maintain. In a stunning twist, Baldoni's legal team, long dismissed by pundits as reactive and defensive, has launched a surgically precise counterattack, one that uses Lively's own actions, statements, and legal maneuvers against her. The very tactics that once made Blake a darling of the courtroom and a feared legal opponent have now come under the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. In fact, what was initially painted as a bold assertion of her rights is being reframed painstakingly, piece by piece, as a deliberate strategy of suppression, deflection, and manipulation. The backlash isn't just legal, it's public. A leaked video, which reportedly shows Baldoni's attorneys catching Lively in a contradictory statement, has gone viral. Social media is ablaze with hashtags like #BlakeLied and #BaldonAbreakthrow, while legal commentators are openly questioning the credibility of Lively's entire case. It's no longer just about the documents being fought over in court. It's about the integrity of the people behind those arguments. And if you thought Hollywood was staying neutral, think again. Sources close to the industry claim that key studios and former allies are starting to put distance between themselves and Blake, citing uncomfortable developments and a PR crisis waiting to explode. Meanwhile, Baldoni, once painted as an opportunist, is being praised for his transparency, consistency, and above all for not backing down. He's not just defending himself anymore. He's going on the offensive, and he's doing it with receipts. This video breaks down exactly how Justin Baldoni turned the tables on Blake Lively, why her legal tactics are now under fire, and what this all means for the future of both their careers. Strap in, because the truth is messier and far more damaging than anyone expected. Justin Baldoni's quiet resolve has finally erupted into a full-fledged strategic counteroffensive, and the entertainment world is watching in stunned silence. For months, he endured a barrage of character attacks, legal maneuvers, and public insinuations launched by Blake Lively's legal team, all aimed at discrediting him before the court of public opinion could even evaluate the facts. But now, the tables have turned. With mounting documentation, insider witness testimony, and a sharpened legal strategy, Baldoni has gone from defensive target to the architect of Blake Lively's greatest legal crisis to date. What triggered this dramatic reversal? The answer lies in a sequence of events that initially seemed minor: a set of subpoenaed communications that Lively's lawyers tried to suppress, allegedly citing irrelevance and privacy. But Baldoni's attorneys knew better. They suspected these messages, some reportedly between Blake Lively and her inner circle, included direct references to the narrative she was constructing behind the scenes, potentially conflicting with the claims made in court. That was the wedge they needed. Once the judge allowed Baldoni's team to review the disputed texts and internal communications under seal, everything changed. What they found wasn't just inconsistent, it was explosive. One message in particular allegedly showed Lively coaching a key witness on what should be said during depositions. Another revealed discussions about influencing public perception, suggesting a coordinated PR campaign disguised as reactive media response. And suddenly, Blake's portrayal of herself as a victim began to unravel. This wasn't just about defamation anymore. This was about potential manipulation of legal proceedings, coercion, and ethical violations. Baldoni's team moved swiftly. Within days, they filed a motion accusing Lively's camp of withholding evidence and attempting to mislead the court. The tone of the case shifted overnight from an abstract dispute between celebrities to a battle over credibility, integrity, and legal accountability. Justin Baldoni's lead counsel, a former federal prosecutor with a reputation for precision and restraint, addressed the media in a rare public statement. "What we are dealing with," she said, "is not just a disagreement over statements, but an apparent pattern of behavior aimed at obstructing the truth. My client did not ask for this war, but now that it's been brought to him, he will not back down." The press exploded. Headlines across Variety, Deadline, The Hollywood Reporter, and even major legal blogs began shifting tone. Where once Blake was framed as the composed, confident victim of alleged slander, now the narrative questioned the methods she used to maintain that image. Has Blake Lively gone too far? Read one. Baldoni brings the receipts. Read another. The shift in tone was subtle but undeniable, and it was fueled by actual legal documentation, not just gossip. Meanwhile, Baldoni refused to gloat. In fact, his own public appearances remained rare and carefully calculated. But when he did speak, it carried weight. In one interview, he stated simply, "I believe in the truth, and I trust the process even if it takes time for the truth to come to light." That humility, contrasted with the emerging claims of Lively's strategic aggressiveness, struck a nerve with audiences. And with the court of public opinion inside the courtroom, the mood changed palpably. Judges who once seemed amenable to Lively's legal framing were now scrutinizing her motions with increased skepticism. The court demanded explanations for previous omissions, inconsistencies, and the suppression of communications that might have been legally relevant all along. And Baldoni's lawyers, armed with these discrepancies, began connecting the dots in filings that read like a thriller novel with a Hollywood A-lister at its center. One of the more damning revelations came when an assistant to a former publicist provided sworn testimony that she was instructed to draft statements defending Blake before the actual filings were even made, suggesting a premeditated attempt to weaponize the media in tandem with legal action. The publicist, whose credibility was previously unimpeachable, refused to confirm or deny the claim, citing a non-disclosure agreement. But the assistant's testimony and the matching timestamps spoke volumes. The judge, now visibly frustrated with the tone of Lively's team, issued a statement reminding both sides of the importance of transparency and respect for the integrity of the court. While the comment was neutral in language, the courtroom attendees noted which legal team the judge was looking at when he delivered the line. Even more telling, Hollywood insiders, those who had long been quiet on the matter, began quietly leaking commentary to journalists. Several anonymous sources described a growing sense of unease within the industry about Blake's tactics. This was supposed to be a clean fight, one executive reportedly told a journalist, but it feels like one side is trying to crush dissent rather than resolve the issue. That's not going over well here. And perhaps the most poetic twist of all, Blake's legal strategy, the aggressive approach meant to silence, discredit, and dominate, has now become the very source of her public and legal unraveling. Baldoni didn't just defend himself, he exposed the architecture of an entire machine, a PR legal hybrid meant to control the narrative by any means necessary. And in doing so, he's placed Blake Lively in a position she never expected. On the defensive, under the spotlight, and with very few people left to blame, the narrative has shifted. And it's not coming back. Blake Lively has long been praised for her poise under pressure. For years, her public image stood as one of Hollywood's most meticulously managed. But in a legal drama playing out far beyond the control of any publicist, that tightly guarded persona is beginning to crack, and not just in the press but in open court. It all began with what seemed like a straightforward motion: Blake's legal team attempting to restrict discovery access to a batch of internal communications they argued were irrelevant. It was a typical legal maneuver, but the implications were massive. Behind the scenes, those communications painted a vastly different picture than what Lively's attorneys were asserting. In front of the judge, it didn't take long for Justin Baldoni's team to notice the inconsistencies, and once they pressed, everything began to spiral. In a surprise move, the judge ruled that Lively's communications were discoverable and could be reviewed. This ruling cracked open a door Blake's team had worked hard to keep sealed, and what lay behind that door was devastating. The text messages, emails, and internal drafts revealed not only contradictions in Lively's story, but also deliberate attempts to control and manipulate witness testimony, potentially misleading the court itself. One particular email, dated weeks before her initial complaint was filed, allegedly details a strategy meeting involving Lively's legal and PR teams, where they discussed a timeline of public statements. What's most damning is the inclusion of phrasing like managing optics, isolating Baldoni's voice, and framing early to control Backlash. This wasn't just about setting the record straight, this was about building a legal case that matched a carefully manufactured public narrative. In response, Baldoni's legal team filed a blistering supplement to their previous motion, accusing Lively's camp of intentionally suppressing materials that were not only relevant, but central to the credibility of her own claims. The legal filing reads like a takedown: methodical, aggressive, and deeply sourced. It outlines timeline discrepancies, suggests selective memory in sworn depositions, and lays out a case for sanctions. In the courtroom, the tension was electric. Sources present during a key hearing described Blake Lively as visibly rattled, her usually composed demeanor giving way to frantic note-passing and whispered exchanges with counsel. At one point, the judge halted proceedings and addressed the room. "This court is not a stage for public relations, it is a venue for facts." That comment, piercing in its simplicity, sent a ripple through the room. The implication was clear. Someone had been treating the courtroom as another platform for performance, and the judge wasn't having it. Worse still for Lively, a former colleague came forward, this time not anonymously. A previous assistant to her lead attorney testified in a closed session. And while the exact content of that testimony remains under seal, multiple legal insiders have confirmed it centered on internal doubts about the consistency of Lively's version of events. One court observer said plainly it undermined her entire case. Outside the courtroom, the media frenzy was building. The same outlets that once uncritically parroted Lively's legal claims were now running double features, one on the leaked communications and another on the fallout. Among Lively's industry peers, sources at two major streaming platforms reported that projects previously discussed with Blake were now on pause pending the outcome of the case. One studio executive went even further, saying there's a fine line between media control and narrative manipulation. This case is dangerously close to exposing the latter. Social media also turned quickly. What had started as a divided conversation between Team Blake and Team Justin now tilted heavily toward Baldoni. With every new court filing, the evidence mounted and the commentary followed. Users began stitching together timelines comparing Lively's media appearances to what was being revealed in court documents. TikTok legal influencers weighed in with one viral clip captioned, "She brought the match, but he had the receipts." Still, Lively's team didn't fold. In fact, they doubled down. In a last-ditch effort to regain control, they filed a counter-motion accusing Baldoni's team of harassment, suggesting the exposure of these communications was part of a smear campaign. But the judge wasn't buying it. In a scathing response, he wrote, "Litigation is not harassment when it seeks the truth. The burden of honesty in court is not optional." That line would later go viral as a meme placed under stylized images of Lively at red carpet events, a brutal contrast between glamour and legal accountability. Even inside Lively's inner circle, fractures began to appear. Reports emerged that several longtime collaborators were quietly distancing themselves from the actress. One unnamed publicist revealed, "It's gotten out of control. She wanted a clean case, but now everyone's worried about getting subpoenaed." Another added, "We were told it would be quick, efficient, and silent. Instead, it's becoming the messiest legal spectacle in years." Then came the most pivotal moment of all. Baldoni's team introduced a video deposition clip that had previously been sealed. In it, Blake appears flustered as she's questioned about inconsistencies between her legal claims and private statements she made to a close friend. The clip shows her hesitating, asking for clarification repeatedly, and finally stating, "I don't recall making that statement in that context," even as the transcript from her own message was read aloud. The damage was done. The moment played on evening news recaps, social media breakdowns, and even late-night talk shows. Legal experts called it a credibility collapse. One former federal prosecutor remarked on a panel, "Once a witness is perceived to be unreliable, especially when it's the plaintiff, the entire case gets weaker. Judges remember. Juries remember." At this point, Justin Baldoni's team no longer needed to rely on broad theories. They had evidence, they had testimony. They had inconsistencies documented in Blake Lively's own words. And perhaps most importantly, they had momentum. Lively's efforts to dominate the legal and media narrative were not only failing, they were backfiring spectacularly. Meanwhile, Baldoni's quiet consistency and well-documented paper trail was becoming a model of how to weather a celebrity legal storm. He wasn't screaming into the void, he wasn't tweeting cryptic statements or calling in favors. He was instead allowing the facts to surface, and that in a media age dominated by spin made him dangerous. Lively, for her part, began withdrawing from public events. Appearances were canceled, sponsorships grew nervous. At one point, an unconfirmed report circulated that she had considered a settlement just to end the barrage of headlines. But insiders say Baldoni rejected early overtures, citing principle over PR. "He's not in this for a payout," one lawyer close to the case explained. "He's in it to set the record straight on the record with evidence." In the end, Blake's carefully constructed fortress of legal and media control didn't just crumble, it imploded. And the only person left standing in the wreckage was the very man she tried to silence. As the legal chaos escalated, what had once been a courtroom tug of war exploded into a full-blown media firestorm. Suddenly, this wasn't just a civil dispute between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. It had become the talk of the town, dominating headlines, trending on social media, and inspiring a level of public discourse more suited to a political scandal than a Hollywood legal battle. The turning point, a massive leak of documents and deposition footage that made their way, whether accidentally or deliberately, into the hands of journalists and content creators. These weren't dry legal exhibits. They were bombshells, each one more shocking than the last, and together they painted a devastating picture of Blake Lively's legal tactics. One leaked document in particular caused a sensation, an internal Memo from Lively's legal team detailing a narrative control strategy. Weeks before the lawsuit was even filed, the memo included timelines for coordinated press releases, targeted influencer outreach, and detailed messaging templates that framed Baldoni as a toxic manipulator, and Blake as the injured but resilient public figure in a vacuum. Such planning might be dismissed as good PR, but in the context of a legal dispute, especially one in which the facts were still being uncovered, it looked dangerously close to manufacturing evidence in the court of public opinion. Even more concerning was a follow-up email chain, showing Lively herself giving feedback on the narrative points. In one message, she allegedly suggests that a line about her emotional vulnerability be emphasized more strongly to draw female sympathy. That phrase, once quoted by media outlets, became a lightning rod for criticism. Was this strategic branding or outright manipulation? Justin Baldoni's team predictably seized on the leaks as proof of their long-standing suspicion that Lively had been attempting to stage manage not just public sentiment, but the court's perception of events. And as more footage came out, especially the now viral clip of Lively fumbling under oath, the public began to connect the dots for themselves. Influencers, legal analysts, and YouTube commentators began deep diving the documents, cross-referencing them with Blake's past interviews and carefully examining inconsistencies. Suddenly, hashtags like #NarrativeGate and #ScriptedScandal trended for days. One particularly explosive video breakdown compared Blake's emotional statements in court with her private messages from the leak, and the contrast was devastating. But the biggest shift wasn't in the courtroom, it was in Hollywood itself. Producers who had previously lined up to work with Blake began pulling back. Streaming platforms, wary of associating with an ongoing controversy, quietly shelved projects or removed Blake from in-development rosters. PR firms whispered that Lively was becoming radioactive, not necessarily for what she did, but for how exposed the strategy had become. Everyone spins, said one anonymous studio executive in an interview with a trade paper. But the minute the spin becomes visible to the audience, you've lost credibility. Blake crossed that line. Meanwhile, Baldoni, who had spent much of the early legal battle being mocked or dismissed by some press outlets, was now being hailed as the underdog who dared to challenge a broken system. His calm demeanor, focus on facts, and refusal to engage in tabloid antics earned him widespread respect. Even those who didn't fully back his claims admitted one thing: he was playing the long game, and it was starting to pay off. Celebrities began weighing in, to some subtly, others more directly. A tweet from actress Gabrielle Union simply reads, "So many masks slipping lately." While she didn't name names, fans speculated immediately about the target. A few hours later, Justin Baldoni liked the tweet and the internet exploded. A week later, Kristen Bell posted a cryptic Instagram story showing her reading a legal thriller captioned, "Some fiction feels oddly familiar." Again, no names, but the timing said it all. Some fiction feels oddly familiar. Again, no names, but the timing said it all. Then came the real gut punch. Taylor Swift, a longtime close friend of Blake's, noticeably unfollowed her on Instagram. It was subtle, unannounced, and totally unexplained, but Swift's fans noticed immediately. Speculation swirled. Did Taylor see the court documents? Was she distancing herself from the storm? Had a line been crossed? Even for her, Swift's silence became its own story, and it spoke volumes. The public, meanwhile, was divided but increasingly skeptical of Blake. Fans who once stood by her began to ask uncomfortable questions. How much of her persona had been real? Was she truly a victim? Or was she a master manipulator who had finally overplayed her hand? Think pieces emerged from across the political and cultural spectrum. Some feminists cautioned against turning the case into a referendum on all women who speak out, but others argued that Blake's actions were dangerous precisely because they risked discrediting genuine victims. One powerful essay in The Atlantic was headlined "When Image Becomes Evidence: Blake Lively and the Weaponization of Sympathy." Back in court, the pressure on Lively's legal team reached a boiling point. The judge ordered an emergency hearing to determine whether any of the leaked documents had been improperly withheld from earlier discovery phases. Under oath, a senior member of Lively's team admitted that certain files may not have been submitted in a timely manner. It was a stunning admission, one that could open the door to sanctions, or even a referral for legal misconduct. For Baldoni, this was vindication. He didn't need to grandstand. The facts were doing that for him. One courtroom source noted how different the two parties now appeared. Baldoni shows up with one or two quiet, calm attorneys. Lively's side looks like a full production team, and yet every week they lose more ground. The most ironic detail, a behind-the-scenes documentary, had reportedly been in the works, chronicling Blake's journey through injustice. But now word leaked that the project was on indefinite hold, perhaps permanently shelved. There's no hero arc anymore, one producer said flatly. It's become a cautionary tale. And if that wasn't enough, yet another leak, this one from inside Lively's own PR agency, made headlines. An internal Slack message sent in panic read, "We need to stop the bleeding. Every interview is making it worse. She has to go quiet." NOW, the damage control machine was malfunctioning and everyone knew it. Through it all, Baldoni's messaging remained consistent. He continued to defer to the court's express faith in due process and quietly thank supporters. His rare interviews emphasized healing truth and the emotional toll of being mischaracterized. But most tellingly, he never once took a victory lap. He knew perhaps better than anyone that the war wasn't over, but the tide had irrevocably turned. And Blake, for someone known for commanding attention, she was suddenly nowhere to be found. By now, the courtroom drama had morphed into something far larger, a full-blown Hollywood reckoning. Blake Lively wasn't just facing legal exposure. She was becoming a case study in how a controlled, carefully constructed celebrity image can disintegrate almost overnight when challenged by someone willing to stand his ground. And while the leaks, the deposition clips, and the public backlash had already done irreparable damage, it was the silence that followed which sealed the shift in power. Blake vanished. No social media updates, no public appearances, no statements. Nothing. This wasn't just the usual PR playbook for damage control, it was retreat. And the silence was deafening. Those who had once rushed to her defense were now notably quiet. Even within her closest circles, people began peeling away. Collaborators, friends, and fellow celebrities, many of whom had previously championed her cause, now took a step back. Not because they suddenly sided with Justin Baldoni, but because the risk of association with Lively had simply become too high. Her most recent endorsement deal quietly expired without renewal. A planned campaign for a luxury brand featuring Lively as the face of modern resilience was pulled just days before launch. According to insider reports, the brand feared backlash after leaked documents and witness testimony painted Lively's resilience as a heavily marketed illusion rather than reality. One executive summed it up bluntly: "You can't sell authenticity if people think you're a manipulator." Meanwhile, Justin Baldoni was experiencing a very different kind of momentum. He wasn't just winning in court, he was winning in public. While Lively's retreat left a vacuum, Baldoni filled it, not with bravado but with quiet strength. He appeared on a few select podcasts, not tabloid-style interviews, but long-form, thoughtful discussions about justice, accountability, and healing from public shaming. He never attacked Lively directly, he didn't need to. The facts spoke louder than insults ever could. On one podcast, Baldoni discussed what it felt like to be portrayed as a villain by someone he once admired. "I was shocked, honestly hurt," he said. Not just by the lawsuit, but by how quickly people ran with a version of the truth that hadn't even been tested yet. "I believed people would see through it eventually. And now here we are." That interview alone drew millions of views in just days. His words weren't defensive, they were grounded in principle. And the contrast between Baldoni's composure and Lively's disintegrating legal strategy wasn't lost on the public. More surprising was how some in the entertainment industry began to openly question Lively's credibility. A major screenwriter who had worked with her in the past tweeted, "We've all seen the spreadsheets, let's stop pretending this was just a misunderstanding." Another quietly confirmed in a blog post that scripts intended for Blake had been rerouted to other actresses. The message was clear: the industry had seen enough. The impact reached beyond Lively herself. Other celebrities, influencers, and public figures who once leaned heavily into image-centric branding began reevaluating their own strategies. One talent agent said, "There's a new fear in the air. If it can happen to Blake, it can happen to anyone. Authenticity is the only safe play now." For Lively, the damage wasn't just reputational, it was deeply isolating. Privately, sources claim she was furious at her legal team, believing they had misjudged Baldoni's resolve. One leak from inside her camp quoted her as saying he was never supposed to fight back like this. If true, that statement reflects the heart of the miscalculation. Lively and her lawyers had gambled on Baldoni folding. Under pressure, on public silence, legal exhaustion, and a career on the line, instead he rose. In court, Baldoni's legal team requested that Blake's side be held in contempt for ongoing delays in complying with discovery orders. This wasn't just a technical issue, it was symbolic of the broader collapse. What began as Blake's attempt to control the narrative had now become a procedural nightmare for her legal camp. One missed deadline after another, one explanation more evasive than the last. Judges don't forget that kind of behavior, and now neither does the public. Blake's silence eventually broke, but not in the way anyone expected. A brief Instagram story, just a white background with black text read, "Sometimes silence is the only thing left to protect what matters." No video, no apology, no explanation, just fake martyrdom. And while some diehard fans clung to it as proof of her emotional burden, the vast majority saw it as another failed attempt at image curation. Comments flooded social media. "Protect what your brand," one user wrote. Another said she cured it. "This disaster, now she wants pity." The story was deleted in under 24 hours. At the same time, Baldoni received a flood of support. Fans, fellow actors, and even public commentators praised him for standing up, staying calm, and pushing back without theatrics. A viral post by a civil rights attorney read, "What Justin Baldoni is doing isn't just brave, it's necessary. Holding power to account even when it's wearing a glamorous face." It wasn't just commentary, it was transformation. Baldoni was no longer just an actor or director. He had become a symbol of resistance against Hollywood's most toxic and manipulative instincts. Behind the scenes, several agencies began drafting internal policies around celebrity litigation, requiring transparency clauses for clients engaged in high-profile lawsuits. One legal consultant commented after what happened with Blake, firms are being more cautious about whose version of the story they buy. Nobody wants to be the next headline, and that perhaps is the lasting legacy of this entire debacle. Blake Lively, once the untouchable Hollywood icon, is now a cautionary tale about the dangers of spinning too far too fast and underestimating the people you target. Justin Baldoni didn't just survive her attack. He exposed the playbook, dismantled the performance, and rewrote the ending. As this part of the saga winds down, the message is clear: in a town obsessed with illusion, sometimes the truth hits harder than any scandal ever could. Blake Lively's legal battle with Justin Baldoni was never just about the lawsuit. It was about power, perception, and control. It was about how far a public figure could go to shape a narrative and what happens when someone refuses to play along. Now, as the dust settles, Hollywood is left to reckon with a new reality, one in which even the most carefully curated personas are no longer immune to exposure, and where truth, once dismissed, can still roar back with consequences. The fallout from this case has changed the landscape.